We are the Friends School of Minnesota Environmental Action Club, a group of middle school activists committed to environmental stewardship. Scientists estimate that there are between 2 and 30 million different species of insects in the world. Less than 1% of insect species are considered pests to humans. The other 99% are considered either benign or beneficial to humans. One class of insects considered beneficial to humans are pollinators. These include bees, butterflies, and moths, which are responsible for carrying pollen from one flower to another, thus completing reproduction for flowering plants, so plants are able to produce seeds and fruits.
Every day across our planet, pollinators perform this important service free of charge to humans. As a result of their work, we enjoy plant products including apples, almonds, avocados, blueberries, cherries, figs, grapes, mangoes, peaches, pears, pumpkins, raspberries, strawberries, and tomatoes, as well as many others.
Unfortunately, populations of many of these important insect species are currently in decline and some are crashing. Scientists around the world recognize this as a crisis and are racing to better understand why this is happening. Well, there are indications that many factors are at play. Two major contributors are loss of habitat as we convert natural lands to agriculture, and other uses and our use of pesticides that go hand in hand with our current agricultural system.
For the last 3 years, we have been committed to protecting pollinators. After learning about the issue of pollinator decline, we gave presentations to other students at our K-8 school.
We participated in the 2017 March for Science.
We collected over 1,000 signatures at our plant sale to bring when we met with the chair of the Agriculture Finance Committee.
At the same time, we learned about the Governor's Committee on Pollinator Protection, a group of people from various backgrounds given the responsibility to help pollinators. They wrote a series of recommendations for Minnesota.
We made this video to educate others about the issue of pollinator decline and to encourage people to take action to protect our world by protecting pollinators.
Pollination happens when a pollinator, like a bee or butterfly, moves between plants of the same species, carrying pollen as it gets nectar from flowers. Once pollen is transferred to the female reproductive organs of the flower, fertilization of the ovules inside the ovary follows. Those ovules turn into seeds. The ovary swells to become a fruit.
Without pollinators, we wouldn't have apples, oranges, or many other fruits. And all of these fruits wouldn't be able to reproduce naturally. It's possible for humans to pollinate plants by hand, but that would be incredibly difficult, time-consuming, and costly. Pollinators like bees, hummingbirds, and butterflies are adapted to this task in a way we could never match.
Neonics are a class of pesticides used to control insects that are considered pests.
What else do we know about neonicotinoids?
A class of systemic insecticide that we use more than any other insecticide these days. And they're systemic, which means that you apply them once and then all those plant tissues absorb that insecticide. So a lot of the way that we use neonics is by coating seeds in them. And then the farmer, when they plant that seed that has that pesticide coating, the corn plant or the soy plant or whatever else you coated will absorb all that neonic as it grows.
Neonics are a new class of pesticide, and they are used by a variety of different producers. I know that Bayer is currently the leading producer of neonics, and they're an insecticide that works by it works systemically. Now, they're not the only type of systemic insecticide, but basically, unlike some other pesticides, which you might spray aerially or apply onto the plant and then it washes off, neonics are actually transmitted into the cells of the plants, and they last for a much longer time. And so we find, for instance, there are a number of seeds that have been treated with neonics, and so then the neonics are transmitted through that plant's pollen, through the flowers, and a lot of times then bees and other pollinators are attracted to a plant that's actually poisonous to them.
Once applied, neonics are absorbed and moved throughout the plant's tissues.
This means they're a systemic pesticide.
Neonicotinoids are designed to be incorporated into plant tissue. So they're not just on the surface of a leaf that an insect might eat, they're actually in the leaf tissue itself. And they're not limited to just the tissues that you're trying to protect. They're in the flower petals and the pollen and the nectar and the roots and everything else. So insects that are feeding on parts of the plant that a farmer doesn't necessarily want to protect. The farmer doesn't care if some of the pollen and some of the nectar gets used, but on a plant that has been treated with neonicotinoids, you've got the pollinators that are going to that plant being exposed to certain amounts of neonicotinoid. And if it doesn't kill them outright, it still has effects on their ability to reproduce, their ability to navigate, their growth potential, basically their ability to live a healthy life.
While neonics have been effective in controlling pest insects, their effects on pollinators are devastating.
It affects their nervous system. So I've seen actually my bees having these weird shaking feelings, their legs shake, and I'm like, oh my God, what's going on with my bees?
When we look at pollinator declines and the huge crisis that we're experiencing, that beekeepers and pollinator advocates are experiencing across the whole world right now, the rise of neonics has greatly impacted that. And pesticides in general aren't usually good for bees. There are a bunch of bee-toxic pesticides, but neonics are particularly harmful, and there's been really strong research that shows that. There's an increasing body of research.
This is a complex issue for many reasons. One of them is that it is hard to know if a plant has been treated with neonics because they're not strictly regulated.
And so if you want to be like our plant sale where we want to not sell these, it took like a year to even really start to even know if we could get plants that didn't have it, because it's a complex system of how plants get to be at the sale in the first place. Like, they don't all get planted as seeds. Like, we don't plant them, obviously, right? We are buying them from growers, and sometimes they're planting a seed in a pot, and sometimes they're buying a piece of a plant and planting that piece of plant. And the piece of plant comes from somewhere else that doesn't necessarily have regulation to even tell you whether it was treated by a neonic or not.
This is a complex issue for farming because we need pest management, but we also need pollination.
It's hard for farmers to get out of using neonicotinoid pesticides because they need to make a living and can't risk losing their crops.
It's a hard life for farmers these days, right? I was talking to a farmer, maybe it was as part of the governor's committee, but somebody mentioned that you have 40 times in your life to plant your corn or your whatever crop you're growing, right? And so losing your crop that one year is a big chunk of the work that you're doing, right? You do what you can to not lose your crop. And so applying pesticides, reducing pest risk is something that folks are concerned with.
Farmers have an increasingly small toolbox is what we're finding. We want farmers to have as many tools as they can so that they can have productive yields and they can make a living for themselves. But when farmers aren't utilizing crop rotation, when they don't have diversified agriculture for a number of reasons, when they don't have other animals or other plants that can help keep their pest populations down, then they find that neonics might be the only thing that they think is available to them. And this is really, I think it's so important not to blame farmers for the problems that are happening in agriculture, because farmers are really, we talk about it like they're on a pesticide treadmill where they're running and they have one pesticide that solves a problem, and then the next problem arises and there's another pesticide that comes in to take its place. And farmers just can't get off this treadmill. So I really like that question, because we need to have a bigger toolbox so that farmers feel like they have everything they need to make their living.
While using pesticides works to control pests now, they can't be a permanent solution if we want a well-balanced ecosystem.
They can't be a permanent solution if we want to ensure access to food for everyone.
the more pesticides we use, the more likely it is that the same pests we're trying to get rid of will develop resistance, which means we have to develop new pesticides, which means it's a constant evolutionary race. And I don't think it's one that we can win. I think that a well-balanced ecosystem will keep pests in check just as well as the application of a lot of chemicals. It's less predictable, and humans like predictability. So it's hard to convince a human that if you just let things be, you will have some bad years and you will have some good years. If you use pesticides, you will have some bad years and you will have some good years, and you'll pay more for it, but you'll feel better because you'll think you're doing something about it. But in the end, I'm not sure the result is any different.
They're responsible for a large portion of the food that we eat, and our diets would be really boring and really unhealthy if we didn't have pollinators to thank for fruits and vegetables and nuts and those kind of really important things.
It would be tremendously sad if we've destroyed the natural world so much that this one whole segment of life doesn't exist anymore or is really damaged.
We look at what's on a typical plate when we eat a meal, and a third of the calories on that plate come from sources that are dependent on insect pollination of plants. We look at the variety of foods we eat, not just the calories, and about 2/3 of all the foods we eat depend on insect pollination. So that's what it means to us.
When we talk about food access and the numbers of foods that rely on pollinators, that's a big social justice issue when we have prices that are going up because we don't have pollinators for our fruits and vegetables.
Monarchs are important because their habitat, the milkweed plants and the flowers that they depend on, are part of a really important ecosystem. And that ecosystem helps protect water quality, it helps protect other pollinators, it helps protect other wildlife like songbirds and hunting animals and all kinds of other important things that you wouldn't necessarily think of when you just think about protecting monarch butterflies.
What it means to ecosystems is that there are plant species that require or that do better with specific insect pollinators. So if those pollinators are lacking, that species does less well. And there are, of course, food chain repercussions down the line. As a plant stops doing well, then things that feed on the plant stop doing well, and things that feed on that animal that feeds on the plant stop doing well. And it's just kind of a snowball effect.
The sooner we confront this issue, the better it will be for pollinators, plants, animals, and people.
We benefit from having a rich experience in life, and that richness comes from a rich biodiversity, which includes insects.
Beekeepers are reporting some of the biggest losses we've seen. You can be a third-generation beekeeper. You know, your grandfather and your father and you all are doing the right things, and you still lose 50% of your colony or more. I know beekeepers who have lost 90% of their colonies in the last year. And so it's a huge problem for the people like that who rely on bees. It's a huge problem for pollinators in general. You know, I think we as people have a duty to protect the most vulnerable in our world, and that's really important to me.
We wouldn't see monarch butterflies migrating. We wouldn't see any of the other butterfly species that people enjoy so much. We wouldn't see the wildflowers that we see now. We wouldn't see the wildlife that feeds on many of those wildflowers. So if you take a piece out, it's like taking a leg out of the camera tripod. Something's going to fall over.
There is hope for a future with pollinators. Minnesota has already taken action through the Governor's Committee of Pollinator Protection, but this is just a start.
Now we need to act on the committee's recommendations. It is crucial for Minnesotans to continue to create healthy pollinator habitats and commit to finding solutions, even across differences.
it's really great that Minnesota did all the work that we have done, and just Governor Dayton creating this committee, it didn't just come out of his head or out of nowhere. It came out of us as Minnesotans caring. And I talked about pollinator-friendly cities a little bit. We have 38 of those communities in Minnesota. Some of them are cities, some are counties, some are townships, some are schools, and that is more than any other state. So I'm excited for this suite of recommendations that we have and the work that we're doing in Minnesota to translate to other states, and also to be used as a model federally.
What actions can people take to help pollinators?
I would love to see a world where we don't need neonics, but I think that we can't rely on just an immediate ban on them. That wouldn't be fair to the people who are currently relying on them for the type of food that they grow. And so I think when we talk about specific spot treatment of neonics, that's a really great place to start. There are two different types of pesticide application. There's prophylactic applications, which are prophylactic applications. Basically, you apply a bunch of pesticides before there's a problem because you think there might be a problem in the future. So it's a type of crop insurance, really. Versus a spot treatment is when you see that there's something on your plants and then you apply the pesticide right there to solve the problem. And so many farmers find that even just walking their fields and having a closer relationship with the work that they're doing allows them to have more spot treatments versus prophylactic treatments.
Actions that I would love to have people take would be both on the personal level and on the political policy level. We definitely can do a tremendous amount just with how we live our daily lives. What we buy, if we buy from companies that promote pesticides or use pesticides, then we're endangering the health of insects. We're endangering the health of the workers who apply the pesticides. We're endangering the health of the workers who make the pesticides. If we buy from companies that are more environmentally attuned, then we're supporting something that we really believe in. And the other personal choice that we can make is, so how do we landscape around our own homes and buildings, our recreational facilities, our schools? You've got a great pollinator garden here at Friends School. I've got a great pollinator garden in my yard. You know, obviously, we're on the same page there. I'd like to see a lot more people doing that. And at the policy level, we need, first of all, we need to respect expertise. When a scientist says, this is so, we don't want a politician to say, well, that's inconvenient for my constituents who want to make money, so I'm not going to believe what you just told me. That is an approach that's sort of like sticking your head in the sand because you don't want to see something unpleasant. It's still there, even if your head's in the sand. So we need policy changes that respect science, and we need policy changes that are in tune with the consequences that we're seeing approaching more and more rapidly with it's been called the insect apocalypse, the decline in insects as far as we know worldwide, and the implications of that. We haven't studied insects well enough to know the exact implications, but it's not hard at all to see that there is a problem and that policy needs to change in order to address that problem.
There are lots of things people all over can do to help, even you.
You can plant a pollinator-friendly garden to provide a healthy habitat for pollinators.
You can go outside and observe pollinators. You can notice them and appreciate what they do.
You can purchase seeds or plants that have not been treated with neonicotinoids.
You can limit the use of pesticides in your own garden and learn about other methods of pest management.
You can write to or visit your legislators and demand they put into action the recommendations of the Minnesota's Governor's Committee on Pollinator Protection.
You can pay attention to current legislation so you can support bills that protect pollinators.
You can educate others about pollinator-friendly practices and encourage them to get involved.
We want a future with pollinators. Over 80% of Minnesotans agree.
To protect pollinators, we need to move toward more sustainable and healthy practices that work for all living things.
This issue is critical to the health of our environment and agricultural systems. It requires immediate attention. Please join us in taking action now.